Hey, hello everybody. Thank you again for joining me for this lesson, this third lesson installment of anger management out of 12 lessons. And so today we're talking about anger control. Now, the foundation of discipline is self-control. Self-control is at the core of anger management. Therefore, whenever we lack self-discipline to control the emotion of anger, we have the potential to become injurious to others and ourselves, both emotionally, physically, and mentally. And so, consequently, as we develop the ability to manage our anger properly, we will become skillful in managing ourselves, as well as the significant relationships that are crucial to our basic survival. You know, the fact is we need one another. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we seek help, is because we realize the value of the people and the relationships that we do have that we do not want to destroy. And so in order to save us from ourselves, we have to learn how to control our anger. And so the learning objectives in this lesson are going to be that we would understand the complex emotion of anger, and to learn that anger control is a difficult skill to master. And so it's something that we're going to have to work at. It's not going to be, but that's one of our objectives. To express hurt rather than anger. To express hurt rather than anger. And number 4 is to learn how to move out of the anger cycle into the healing cycle. And I think that's something we would all like. So let's look at the first point. First off, anger is a complex emotion. Anger is usually combined with other emotions such as fear, hurt, envy, jealousy, revenge, or depression. And its anger is usually a secondary emotion that is experienced in frustrating situations. Now, the frustration, frustration is a common emotional response in psychology that is related to anger. And I'm just trying to figure out kind of where, how much I want to share. But frustration is the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of the inability to change or to achieve something. That's the actual definition of frustration. It's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves and about our emotions if we'll just look up the definition of what is this? What does this mean? So the study of our own behavior, that's basically what psychology is. And so we're just kind of getting to know ourselves. But frustration that is unchecked can lead to bitterness. And so we have to be careful. And bitterness is what will keep us from getting better. If we're bitter, then we're not going to get better. And so I'd rather be better than bitter. And so we need to learn how to control our anger. And so anger is it's a secondary emotion that's experienced in frustrating situations. And then there is usually a root emotion that we experience first. And so needs and emotions are connected together. Whenever there is anger, it's usually a reaction to another deeper feeling and serves as a way of covering up the other feeling that we're having up. And a lot of times when we get angry, it's because we feel inadequate, or, we'll have some good examples for us to follow today. We're going to have an actual practical relational study here that's in this lesson that will help us kind of get a visual of what we need to try to do to be able to relate to one another and not be angry. So again, it's a skill that has to be worked on. It's not something that will be developed overnight. So that's something you need to understand at the very beginning of this lesson. So anger control is a difficult skill to master. When someone says or does something that causes us to feel hurt, irritated, or frustrated, we can easily lose control. And so again, frustration is where we're annoyed because we cannot change. There's an inability within us, that something that we're fighting, an underlying emotion. And just to give you a quick psychology little lesson here, psychologist Robert Plutchik, he states that there are 8 basic emotions. And the emotions are joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, anticipation, anger, and disgust. And so those are basic emotions. And a lot of times we get angry because one of our needs, we're not feeling our needs, and our emotions are being met. So because needs and emotions are connected, so my needs not being met, therefore I get emotional response, I get frustrated, and then I become angry, and all of it's related. So it's just natural. We all do this to one another. I know that we're talking about this and we're seeking help for how to do this, but this is something that is common to all men. And so when something does something that causes us to feel hurt, irritated, frustrated, we can lose control. Our angry, out of control reactions have the potential to cause as much or more damage than the initial action. So the goal is to be angry without the loss of control of our words, our nonverbal expressions, and or our actions, I misspoke myself there, because actions can destroy our relationship. If we lose control, it's like taking a little bit out of that bank deposit where you've invested love, you've invested kindness, you've invested acts of compassion, all these things into this bank of a relationship. But every time we lose control of that relationship, we lose control and we allow anger, it's like we're taking out of that bank, and eventually we can deplete and we'll have an absence of funds altogether. Just as an analogy. So express your hurt rather than your anger. So let's get into this. Again, hurt, before we become angry, we typically experience some form of hurt. So now women run on emotions. Men and women are totally different. A lot of men they'll internalize all of their feelings and not say anything. And then, of course, the overwhelming internalization of all these feelings will erupt. It's like a volcano, and then we explode with anger. That some men, not all men, I'm just speaking in general now, so let's not say all men are bad. All men internalize. We don't want to do that. But women do run on emotion, so they go through these, and so we have to be sure that we can try to minister, if you don't mind me using that word, joy, trust, minister to their fears, minister to the surprise, the sadness, the anticipation, the anger, the disgust, because we have all of these emotions are in us, and we will experience these emotions. And so we need to be careful. But let's see if we can, express our hurt rather than our anger. The hurt may stem from a feeling of being rejected, misunderstood, neglected, or not feeling cared for or important. Therefore, instead of expressing our hurt feelings or of sadness or disappointment, our fears of rejection, we more commonly lash out in anger. And so here's one of the things that I made myself a note of. I wanted to make sure I mentioned is that when expectations collide, generally it is followed by disappointment. When your expectations collide because you want something and then your significant other doesn't deliver on that something, expectations. And so we have to try to move from expectations back into desire. This is what I desire. This is what I hope for. These are the responses we want. When we're dating, generally in relationships, we have these desires. But when we get married and we're in a covenant relationship, for some reason, those desires become expectations. And when expectations aren't met, we get angry. No, that's not right. We get frustrated, and frustration leads to anger because we don't see the ability to change, and we fear that it never will, and then therefore we get angry and things of that nature. So therefore, instead of expressing hurt feelings, all of our disappointment kicks in, and we lash out in anger as a common response. Now, the most common message behind a stance of I'm angry is I am hurting. So I am depleted, and I have a need for love and affection, and I feel unappreciated and unloved. Interpretation, it means I feel like I have no value. And we have to have value. We need to feel valued. It's what helps us in our relationships. And when people feel value, it's what will sustain a relationship and cause a marriage to last several years rather than fall prey to statistics where so many marriages are failing. So when anger is expressed in place of these underlying feelings, it has precisely the opposite desired effect. So we have to move out of the anger cycle into the healing cycle. So if we would initially share our hurt feelings with the other person instead of the fact that we are angry, you have a better chance to avoid a fight and start the healing process. And so when you tell the other person that you're angry at him or her, then you're usually met with anger and not with sympathy or an apology. So anger produces anger. That's what happens. And so when this happens, a cycle will go from anger to hurt and then back to anger. And so when a person says that he or she is angry with you, you may feel inadequate. Now, this is something, I skipped over this, I'm going back one, that you may feel inadequate, guilty, judged, or hurt. When a person says that he or she is angry with you, you may feel inadequate, guilty, judged, or hurt. So I wanted to slow down for just a second and not go too fast here, because we need to understand when this happens, a cycle will go from anger to hurt and then back to anger. However, expressing hurt moves you out of anger from that cycle to the healing cycle. And so practical ways, let's talk about practical ways to get out of the anger cycle and into the healing cycle. One of the most practical ways is to say, I am hurt, rather than I'm angry or I'm mad or I'm upset. And so it's much more effective to express our hurt and pain rather than our anger, our hate, or resentment, because all of those are connected. And those, we don't like to think about those, but that's what develops in the relationships. Hate, anger, resentment becomes bitterness, and we feel like you're not going to change, and then the relationship ends abruptly and with notable irreconcilable differences. And so let's try to move beyond that. When hurt is expressed, it leads to healing. When anger is expressed, it brings about more anger. It begets more anger. And so anger produces anger. Therefore, it's best to share your hurt rather than your anger. So 2 practical examples I want to share with you today. Our first example is Brian and Rachel. What's so funny is I actually know a Brian and a Rachel, and I'm pretty sure they'll never see this video, but I'm thinking of them right now. Brian says, Rachel, I'm so angry at you. I hate it when you tell me to pick up my clothes 3 times within a half an hour. Rachel replies, and she says, well, I'm angry too. You know, she said, if you're going to act like a child, then I'm going to treat you like a child. And so in this example, Brian's expression of anger increased Rachel's tendency to defend her position rather than to help her to understand Brian's feelings. In fact, she resorted to anger just like Brian did. He responded angrily, she responded angrily. Now let's look at the second example. Brian, Rachel, I feel as if I'm your child when you ask me to pick up my socks 3 times within a half an hour. It's hurtful, it's humiliating. And so Rachel replies, well, I get irritated because I feel I need to pick up after everyone every single day. And I don't want to make you feel humiliated, but I need your help. And so I feel like I've had this conversation before in my relationships. I've been married over 30 years. And so but what we see here is, because Brian shared his hurt feelings rather than his anger, Rachel was less defensive and yet still able to share hurt feelings of not being supported. And so this exchange of hurts diminished the negative effects that anger would have had on the situation. So there's 2 scenarios, and they're very common, but one of them takes a lot of work to try to accomplish. And so the concept is hard to put into practice, but because we're prone, we're kind of preconditioned, if you will, to jump right into an expression of anger to share our initial hurt feelings. But it's worth the effort, and the results are awesome if we can get this, if we can try to express our feelings and create a win-win scenario in our relationships. I want you to win and I want to win. I don't want to be attacked and treated like a child, and yet I want you to feel supported. So it's a win-win scenario, and that's one of the areas